Hey guys, what's up? Media Retrospective here, and today I want to talk to you all about one of my favorite villains, Tai Lung. And Tai Lung for me is a really interesting character, really great villain, really memorable, and one of my favorite characters, if not my favorite, from the whole Kung Fu Panda series. What makes him such a great antagonist, I hear you ask? Well, that's what I really want to talk about today. I think he's written in a very interesting, multi-layered and compelling way. He's not just a crazy villain trying to take over the world. And I'm going to do another video about what I think is a problem when the stakes are too high, they're too big, like another villain trying to take over the world or the universe is at risk or anything like that. Personal stakes are what makes a villain and a story really great. And Tai Lung really ticks this box. Not only does he have a really personal connection to a lot of the characters in the movie, but the stakes are relatively low, but they're very personal, they're very interesting, and they're very relatable. He's a very relatable villain to me. He's not just a generic bad guy who has a generic plan that we as the audience can't relate to. You know, we can't relate probably or hopefully to someone who's crazy and just wants to take over the world or destroy the world, but we can relate to somebody who has the same kind of personal and human struggles that we have, because it resonates with us and it reminds us of our own lives. So I'll give a small recap of Tai Lung's backstory from the first movie, but I don't want to go too much into detail on it. I think there's a lot of videos which already kind of break this down. But basically, for those of you who don't know or just want a quick recap, Tai Lung is introduced as the protege of Master Shifu, who is the Kung Fu sensei in the movie, or one of the senseis in the movie. He finds him when he's a small cub, adopts him, and decides to raise him as his own. And when the cub begins to show skill at Kung Fu, Shifu decides to train him up. And Shifu raises him from a cub to a full-grown adult, training him all these years at Kung Fu, and basically constantly tells him that he is destined for greatness and that his destiny is to become the fabled Dragon Warrior. So Tai Lung trains his whole life aiming to become the Dragon Warrior. He believes it's his destiny, and then when the day comes to receive the Dragon Warrior scroll, the other sensei, Oogway, denies this. And in response, Tai Lung, furious at the rejection, furious at the betrayal, decides to go on a rampage. He ravages the Valley of Peace, breaking into the temple before finally being stopped by Oogway himself, and then being imprisoned for the next 20 years. And this is his backstory as explained to us by Tigress in the movie when she explains it to Poe. And this is really the pivotal moment in Tai Lung's character. But it's not just about ambition, and it's not just about his ego. It's about his identity, his self-worth, and the crushing weight of the expectations put upon him by Shifu. When Tai Lung confronts Shifu at the end of the story, when he fights him in the Jade Temple, we get a bit more insight into his side of the story and how he perceived what happened when he was younger. I want to break this down into a few different chapters where we're going to be talking about different things. The first thing I want to talk about is Tai Lung's self-perception, his image of himself. And I want to make one thing very clear first, that children don't crave Kung Fu, and children don't crave anything in particular. And I'm obviously referencing back to when Tai Lung was a cub here. What kids really mostly crave is the approval of their parents. And I think this is something that's very relatable to every human, really. It's, you know, and not just the approval of our parents, but the approval of our peers and our friends and of society at large. It's a deep-rooted desire and fear that we all have. The fear of rejection by the ones who know us most intimately. The fear that our innermost selves are somehow lacking or unworthy of acceptance. So when Tai Lung shows an interest in Kung Fu, it's likely the case that what he really wants is Shifu's approval, and he sees Shifu is a Kung Fu sensei and a master, and so seeking Shifu's approval, Tai Lung also tries to do this, and basically it works. Shifu is happy and he's proud, and he decides to train him up and make his whole life about Kung Fu. And as a result of this, and as a result of Tai Lung desiring Shifu's approval and love, he has essentially tied his self-worth and his self-perception to his ability as a Kung Fu warrior. And I think something that supports this is the fact that he never refers to Shifu as father. Throughout the entire movie, he only refers to him as master. And Shifu also refers to himself as his master when he talks to Tai Lung. So when he's rejected for being the Dragon Warrior, it's almost a rejection of his innermost self, what gives him his self-worth. And this is what makes him so angry. And this is one of the things that makes him so relatable. I think we could all relate to this fear of rejection, this fear that we are not good enough, and that the way we see ourselves is not the way that other people see us. And another thing I find interesting about this is Tai Lung is set up deliberately as a contrast to the wider themes of the movie, and also as a dark reflection of Po, who is the true dragon warrior. So whereas Po's journey is about self-discovery and embracing one's true self, Tai Lung represents what happens when one is consumed by an imposed identity and cannot adapt to having that identity rejected. This failure to adapt is a failing of Shifu's, and it is why I think the movie refers to Tai Lung as Shifu's creation. I believe a lot of the conflict in Tai Lung's character comes from the fact that this identity, this idea of being the dragon warrior, was in fact imposed on him by Shifu. Shifu, and by extension Tai Lung, view destiny and fate as something to be controlled. And this is really prominent in the scene where Shifu talks to Oogway at the peach tree. He tells Oogway he believes that they are the masters of their own destiny. Oogway, however, explains that Shifu is too concerned with what has and what will be. He explains that Shifu should only be living in the present and that he should give up on his illusion of control because a person's fate is already set for them, i.e., there are no accidents. Shifu's inability to accept this is a failing on his part, and it's a failure that actually directly led to the creation of Tai Lung. As Shifu was unable to accept this principle and tried to impose this identity of the Dragon Warrior upon Tai Lung is also unable to accept that he is not the Dragon Warrior, therefore is unable to find peace with himself when he is rejected. This belief that both Shifu and Tai Lung has is a Taoist belief, which I don't want to get into too much because I'm definitely not an expert on Taoism, but just to reference it in a superficial way, one of the key principles of Taoism is the concept of Wu Wei, which the idea of this is that your actions should be in harmony with the natural world. So the natural order of things is set, and that to find peace and harmony with this natural order of things, you need to accept your place in the world. You need to accept your place in the natural order. This is the fatal flaw of both Shifu and Tai Lung. They try to impose their will upon the natural order and control their fate rather than accepting it. And this is obviously what led to Tai Lung's imprisonment, his failure to accept that he was not the Dragon Warrior. And then this is also what led to his eventual release, where Shifu orders the guards to be doubled, hence the quote from Oogway.
One often meets his destiny on the road he takes to avoid it.
Tai Lung is trapped by an identity that was imposed upon him, unable to adapt or accept any other path. And this contrast with Po is crucial. It highlights the theme of destiny and how it can also be a double-edged sword, uplifting one person while destroying another. And one thing which is interesting to note is that despite what I said earlier about Tai Lung craving Shifu's approval, it is interesting to see that at the end of the movie when they have their fight, Tai Lung does actually receive Shifu's approval, where Shifu tells him he was always proud of him, but he still doesn't find peace within himself. And I really love the relationship between Tai Lung and Shifu. It's really interesting. I think it's really at the core of his character and what went wrong with him. It's emotionally charged. It's a complex web of relationships, familial bonds, and you almost see for a moment that Tai Lung is almost second guessing himself. He's almost reconsidering his actions. At the very least, it hits him very deeply when he hears these words from Shifu. These are words that we imagine he might have been waiting to hear for a long time. And judging by his reaction, it's something he's never heard before from Shifu. And you can really see how Tai Lung struggles to reconcile this person who was his father, his sensei, and ultimately his imprisoner, and the person who betrayed him and stood in his way. And I think this makes him more compelling as a character because we see that potentially it could have been a different way. If he had been raised differently, if Shifu had made some different decisions, then we can almost see that Tai Lung had the potential for greatness. He did become something great, but it was twisted into something dark by the weight of the expectations that were put upon him and that he couldn't escape from. And it reflects the mistakes and pitfalls that we can all fall into when we let our fears and our desires dictate our actions. I think a big part of the teachings of this movie is accepting one's place and almost going with the flow. In a sense, I mean, to call back to Oogway again, perhaps sometimes we are too concerned with the past and the future. Perhaps sometimes we do need to focus more on the present. And so, in summary, I think what really elevates Tai Lung from a typical antagonist to a really great villain is that complexity. I think his motivations are deeply human, and although he's menacing and formidable in the movie, he's also sympathetic and it's understandable. You can kind of see where he's coming from, even if we don't agree with the actions he takes as a result of that. But he isn't evil for the sake of being evil. His actions stem from hurt, betrayal, and a corrupted sense of purpose. And this depth is what makes him a compelling character. Felt bad for Tai Lung when he had the final confrontation with Shifu. I wanted him to be redeemed. I think it's a really missed opportunity that the movies never returned to Tai Lung in future sequels. I think he was the best villain that Kung Fu Panda had. And I think his is a story that can resonate with a lot of us. I think a lot of us deal with expectations put on us by others. And I think a lot of us can sometimes feel overwhelmed by the expectations of who we could or should be rather than who we are. And it demonstrates the importance of accepting oneself for who they are, finding peace with themselves, and finding harmony within that. So guys, that's the video for today. This is something I really want to talk about because I really like Tai Lung. I think he's a great villain. I think he's a great character. And I'm really interested to hear what you guys think about him as well. Can you relate to his struggles? Do you agree with what I said? I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments. I'll definitely try and reply to each person if you leave a comment. If you'd like to hear me talk about anything else or any other topics or any other characters, please let me know. Thank you.